Permanent Ink by Maxine on AO3.
Chapter 7. Okay, so he was maybe in denial. It was annoying to realize because Katsuki didn't like running away from things, but he had to admit that he'd spent the last several weeks since getting his words actively not thinking about what they meant, or what he was going to do when July rolled around and this possible life-changing secret was potentially discovered. Would Deku ignore it too? Ha! Fucking unlikely. Deku was incapable of ignoring anything. He'd probably want to talk about it, which was just going to be awful and awkward. And then what? What the hell would they do after that? It was the after part that he refused to think about. He was totally fine with becoming one of those soulmate pairs that somehow managed to ignore their words and live life separately. Except he never really known life without Deku in it. It was actually hard to imagine. Like, they were briefly friends, as it were, but before his words came in, he'd just assumed that at this point, with Deku having all for one and Katsuki being in on the whole thing, that they'd always have at least run in the same circles as they battled their way to the number one spot. They could be platonic soulmates, right? Platonic rival soulmates? That could be a thing. Katsuki made a face. No, it definitely wasn't a thing. The heck is that look for? Kaminari asked, chuckling a little from where he was sitting at, his desk across his room. He had his guitar out and was absently strumming at the strings, alternating between the chords. It's nothing, Katsuki murmured. He was cross-legged on Kaminari's bed, a long-forgotten textbook open in his lap. Just thinking. About? Nothing. So, Midoriya then. Katsuki frowned and threw his pencil at the other boy. Kaminari just laughed and dodged out the way. Come on, what is it? None of your damn business, that's what. Have you thought about what his words are going to be? No. No, he hadn't, because he didn't even know where to start with that. There were a lot of possibilities. We've known each other too long, he said, resting his elbow on his knee and popping his chin into his hand. Could be fucking anything. Kaminari grinned, plucked a few notes of some song that Katsuki didn't know. I bet he'd end up with a string of curse words. He'd be furious, Katsuki said, grinning back, besides himself. Probably be scared to show his mom. Honestly, though, there were really just too many options. Most of them not so great at that. His grin faded and he grimaced a little as he thought about it. There were definitely more bad things it could say than good. Maybe he'd get lucky and it would pull something from their early childhood, something about All Might being cool. Deku would probably like that. And it would be vague enough that it wouldn't necessarily tie back to Katsuki. He was avoiding thinking about it again, but seriously, he couldn't even get his brain to go there. Katsuki was a couple weeks into this thing with Kaminari now, okay? And he knew all kissing and even a little about getting handsy, and if he tried to imagine doing those things with Deku, nope. Katsuki's face felt like it was on fire. He literally couldn't. Fuck it. He still had about a month left until Deku's birthday. He would just circle back to that later. He focused on Kaminari again, watching as he concentrated on the guitar strings. I can't believe you still play that thing. Kaminari blinked, looking up at him. He huffed out a soft laugh. Dude, do you know how long I spent practicing for the Culture Festival? Seems like a waste just letting all that go. Besides, I actually enjoy it. We should get the band back together sometime. No way, Katsuki said immediately. Not interested. Oh, come on, you didn't hate it. I didn't love it either. But it wasn't that bad, right? Kaminari stumped out a couple lines of an upbeat melody. I actually asked my parents to get me a guitar for my birthday. Katsuki arched his eyebrows. That's not yours? Nah, Jiro's letting me borrow it. She'd probably let you borrow her drums again if you asked. I'm not interested, Katsuki said again, with a roll of his eyes this time. He tipped his head slightly, watching Kaminari. Your birthday's soon? Yep. Kaminari paused his playing and glared down at his smooth, unmarked skin of his right arm. End of the month. You ever think about it? What your words will be? Kaminari snorted. Only all the time. Maybe something music or band related? Katsuki said, smirking, and he watches as Kaminari flushed and the lightest pink of splash across his cheekbones. It was stupidly attractive, actually. Katsuki was not in the habit of judging whether another person were good-looking or not. He didn't usually give a shit, for one, but It also wasn't just something that ever crossed his mind. It wasn't information he was ever going to do anything with, so his brain never bothered deciding if a person had something about their looks that made him sit up and notice, personally or just objectively. But Kaminari right now, with his head ducked, his hair falling into his eyes, a sheepish grin tugged at his mouth, that warm hue to his skin, something bubbling up in Katsuki's gut, something flawned, which was gross, but it was okay. Kaminari was okay. Kaminari was nice and thoughtful and willing to help out, and still practiced playing guitar that Jiro was letting him borrow. And he was kind of an idiot, but he wasn't weak by any stretch of the imagination, and he was actually sort of hot. What the fuck? He could be super obnoxious about girls and was desperate to be liked by everyone. Yet he told Katsuki to his face after knowing him for a week that he had a dumpster fire of a personality, and then he stuck around anyways. And now here they were. His soulmate would be lucky to have him. Was Deku attractive? Katsuki could think about that, right? That was safe. That didn't involve trying to imagine doing stuff with him. Those were the kind of thoughts that made Katsuki's insides twist up in knots, and his heart thumb loudly against the back of his ribcage. No, this was simply trying to figure out if Deku was, ugly or not. He was focused too much on this physical aspect of being soulmates. Maybe there was an entire emotional side of it, which was something he was wholeheartedly unprepared to start waggling through. At least he was thinking about it. Shit, that was something. Even if there was the worst and he made him want to crawl up on his skin, mortaling over these things started to become Katsuki's new norm. He'd find himself doing any fucking random thing with one of his friends, trying to imagine doing it with Deku instead. Most of the time, it was totally mundane, like something as stupid as watching TV with Kirishima. It was easy enough to replace him with Deku in his mind, and that was usually alright. He could probably handle eating a meal with him, maybe even being able to study with him in one of their rooms. It wasn't like he and Deku didn't spend time together now. After all, it was just that they were rarely alone when they did. All Might was present most of the time. They trained together. He had to be if they wanted to use their quirks while sparring. The few times he wasn't there, they ended up doing non-quirk related exercises. They didn't really talk much, just said what they needed to and got on with it. All Might was there for most of their otherwise alone time, now that Katsuki thought about it. At the gym in the teacher's lounge, that time they actually fought for real and word vomited their complete feelings at each other, he was practically supervising their whole relationship. They'd had their work studies over the winter, of course, that involved spending a shit ton of time together, except Todoroki had also been present for the whole thing. On their own, he and Deku didn't exactly hang out. All that aside, it was easy enough to substitute Deku in for any of his friends when something completely inconsequential was going on. If he had Kaminari pinned to his bed, however, one hand shoved up his shirt and another buried in his hair as he nuzzled at his jaw and pressed open-mouthed kisses along his neck, trying to imagine Deku in that position instead was fucking debilitating. His entire body would burn, stomach lurched up in his chest, and he'd had to take a moment to bury his face into Kaminari's shoulder and just try to breathe, catch his breath, think about anything else. And if it was the other way around, if Katsuki was on his back and Kaminari was straddling his hips, grinding down on him, looking fleshly kissed by the straps of his tank top slipping off his shoulders, picturing Deku hovering over him instead almost caused him to straight up flatline. Other times it was simpler. He was sitting on the couch in the common room with Kaminari one Sunday morning, slumped against him more than he would normally allow himself. Public displays of affection weren't exactly his thing, to absolutely nobody's surprise. But it was kind of early and he was still a little sleepy. Kaminari was warm and Katsuki was comfortable. And just fuck it, you know? What the hell did he care if someone else saw them? So there he was, practically fucking cuddling the other boy and watching his shoulder as he played some boring ass held game that involved chopping down some trees or some shit. And it was fine. It actually was. He could maybe do this crap with Deku one day. Hey, Kachan. Katsuki was close to doozing off at that point for a second, and he'd actually thought it was Kaminari talking to him, except the voice was coming from somewhere behind them. And when he shifted to look over the back of the couch, it was Deku who was standing there, watching the two of them, somewhat perplexed look on his face. Katsuki instinctively wanted to jerk away from Kaminari, maybe throw himself across the room and pretend he didn't do that. So disgusting, soft, but he made himself stay put. What? He grunted. Kaminari greeted Deku with a cheerful, "Yo, Midoriya." "Morning," Deku said to him. He sounded perfectly normal, but his smile was all wrong, tight, and kind of strained. Katsuki lifted an eyebrow at him. "What do you want?" He ignored the subtle jab at Kaminari's elbow into his side. Deku blinked, his expression clearing. I was wondering if you mind bumping up our training today? Something came up this afternoon." "Everything alright?" Kaminari asked. Yeah, it's fine. It's just I've got a date." He looked sheepish as he said it, although he and Brownface hadn't been together for 4 fucking months now. Kaminari made a teasing ooh sound, and Deku blushed like an idiot. It's a double date, actually." "Oh, shit!" Kaminari straightened up a little, looking eager. "Todoroki and Yamamu again?" Deku nodded, which made Katsuki snort. Does he actually know it's a fucking date this time? "That wasn't his fault," Deku said tiredly. He had been... Katsuki snorted. Does he actually think it's a fucking date this time? "That wasn't his fault," Deku said tiredly, like he'd had this conversation at least 10 times already. "I wasn't clear enough. I should have..." He paused suddenly, eyes going wide as he stared at Katsuki. "Wait, you know about that?" "What? I pay attention." "No, you don't," Deku said, which, fair. He had this weird expression on his face again. "I'm pretty sure you didn't know I was dating Uraraka for, weeks." Okay. Katsuki was doing the dignified, "that's with a reason." He lifted his chin up a bit, letting his smirk settle on his face, as he horned in on something instead. "Uraraka," he said slowly, and watched as Deku went red all over again. Kaminari, for as much as he was fucking stupid in their class a lot of the time, he was actually pretty smart with people. He had a knack for reading them, and caught on almost immediately to what Katsuki was doing. "Katsuki, be nice," he said, reaching up and tugged on the lock of his hair. Deku looked like he was about to implode. Katsuki tried not to feel too smug about that, but he almost felled instantly. Deku sucked in a breath. His voice was doing something weird, high-pitched kind of thingy, but he soldiered on regardless. "Do you guys want to come with us?" "Gross," Katsuki murmured, and Kaminari laughed and said, "No way, dude, but thanks." "Okay," Deku said, clearly relieved. "Maybe next time? Anyways, Kachan, Jim?" Katsuki, for some fucking reason, looked at Kaminari before answering. It was like he needed his permission. No, it was just... he was checking with him. They were the only two hanging out down here at the moment, so if Katsuki left Kaminari, then he would be all by himself. And Katsuki was actually checking with him to make sure it was okay. Wow. The hell was happening to him? Kaminari just smiled at him. He cut a glance towards Deku, and Katsuki watched as something mischievously flared across his face. "It's fine," he said, and then he grasped Katsuki's chin and leaned forward to smack a kiss to his cheek. "You two have fun. Think I'm gonna go bother Jiro for a bit. See if I can get her to help me with some chords I keep fucking up." Katsuki felt his face slightly warm, and he could see Deku straight out gasping at them at the corner of his eye, but he was forced himself to stay and just heaved himself up from the couch. "Help with some chords?" he replied, low and amused. "Kinky." He dropped a hand on Kaminari's head as he walked past, ruffling his hair. "I gotta change. Deku, I'll meet you outside," he said to the still smocked back boy. "Oh, okay, yeah, sure," Deku babbled, his hands coming up to hover awkwardly in midair. He was looking like he wasn't sure what to do with them, and ended up giving Katsuki a thumbs up. "Great, I'll just fill up our water bottles." Katsuki snorted. "Fine." He glanced back at the two of them before he left the room. At Deku, who had the appearance of someone whose whole world just been flipped upside down, and Kaminari still sitting on the couch, smirking with an entirely too satisfied expression on his face. Katsuki returned the smile, the corner of his mouth tugging upwards. "Later, Dengi." Kaminari beamed. Deku spun on his heels, staggering off in the direction of the kitchen. Katsuki barked out a laugh. Totally worth it. Before I go on to my little notes on the fanfic right now, I'm gonna read this note directly from the author. One gym date coming right up. So excited for tomorrow's episode. Which I'm actually gonna record tomorrow. I'm recording this Monday. I just came back from summer school, which sucks. Also, the whole Denki and Bakugo thing going on, I am flabbergasted. I didn't know that was gonna be in this fanfic. It is nowhere in the tags. Nowhere. Flabbergasted, honestly. I didn't know it was gonna be there. Whiplash. Whiplash. Regardless, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, and have a wonderful day or night. And thank you so much for watching.